Did you see the mayhem in Gaza today when a tiny bit of food was distributed? After blocking food to Gaza for nearly 3 months and creating these famine conditions, Israel's new U.S.-backed aid distribution plan began today and immediately descended into chaos. Thousands of desperate Palestinians rushed the barbed wire enclosed site, and armed contractors fired live rounds to control the crowds. This is not a humanitarian aid plan. It is a system of containment and control. Instead of working with the UN and the NGOs that have proven systems for delivering aid, Israel and the U.S. bypassed them with false claims that Hamas was diverting aid. Even the head of the World Food Program, Cindy McCain, who is a Republican, says there is no evidence of that. And now Palestinians are being forced into militarized zones to receive a little bit of food under the control of the very Israeli military that is starving them. This violates every basic principle of humanitarian aid, which must never be weaponized. The world must speak out against this inhumane system concocted by Israel and the U.S. and demand that Israel allow unrestricted humanitarian access at scale, which would mean 500 to 600 trucks a day. And they must also implement a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire to end Israel's relentless military assault. We must demand that Israel stop the starvation, stop the killing. The people of Gaza need food, not bombs.
So here to speak now in support of the Middle East Children's Alliance, and we hope you'll join us in supporting this wonderful organization on top of what you've already given. Please join me in welcoming Gabor Maté.
Well, good evening. I hope you can hear me. I said in the clip that I'm not angry anymore. The hell I'm not angry. I'm totally enraged. I make my living really speaking the truth as I see it about human development, about trauma, about childhood, about illness, about health, what it means to be a human being. And I'm usually very confident and comfortable that I can convey in my words my understanding and perceptions of the world. In this case, I feel completely inadequate to actually put into words what I feel, what I see, and also what I perceive many human beings are going through right now. It's simply the words escape us. When in my adolescence, I first found out about the Nazi genocide of my own people, literally, almost every day when I would think about it, my head would spin. Literally, my head would spin. I think, how is this even possible? And I feel like I'm back with that adolescent, almost naive incomprehension about how this, what we're witnessing, can possibly be going on. It's a real privilege to be on the stage with Chris, whose work I followed for many years, who's been, as Aaron pointed out, such a beacon for truth in such a dark, dark world. Every era seems to have its moral touch point, and the theme tonight is Gaza as the moral issue of our time. In the 19th century, there was the question of freedom in Poland, actually. In the 20th century, amongst other major events, you might say that the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s was a moral touchstone. Where you stood on that issue told you where you stood on the world. In the 1960s, 70s, it was the Vietnam War. But all those situations, as much as they concentrated the issue of human morality and human ethics, there was something somewhat different about them, in that at least in the Spanish Civil War, and certainly in the Vietnam War, there was a fighting chance. And now we're seeing the slaughter of civilians and children and kids being amputated without anesthetics and being starved. And the press has always lied, but the lies have never been more egregious, and the silence has never been more deafening than it is today. And since I can't quite find the words, let me quote a Muslim, an Arabic writer, Omar al-Akkad, who in his wonderful, wonderful book, One Day Everyone Will Have Been Against This, says the following: the moral component of history, the most necessary component, is simply a single question asked over and over again. When it mattered, who sided with justice and who sided with power? What makes moments such as this one so dangerous, so clarifying, is that one way or another, everyone is forced to answer. And Palestine is the issue of our time, where you stand on that issue tells you whether you've got a heart that's even open and functioning. Because you see, in the Western world, we value knowing with the mind, with the intellect. And with the intellect, you can make all kinds of arguments about who started what and who's responsible for what. But to be even asking as to where the truth lies means that you completely cut off from your heart and from your guts. So there's ways of knowing that combine the gut and the heart and the mind. And as somebody said, without the gut and the heart informing the mind, we're nothing but genius-level reptiles. And those genius-level reptiles are running our world right now. A wonderful Palestinian writer, Muhammad al-Kurd, who Chris has interviewed on his program, puts it this way: a universality that recognizes the Palestinian condition is the human condition. Palestine is a microcosm of the world, wretched, raging, fraught, and fragmented, on fire, stubborn, ineligible, dignified. The lens we lend the Palestinian reveals how we see each other and how we see everything else. And that is why Palestine is the moral issue of the world. And sometimes you wonder, what the hell world am I living in? Last year, when there were pictures of skeletal children, infants in Gaza, you know what the New York Times had an article about in their Sunday front section? About a fucking farm in Israel where they grew caviar for export. And how dedicated these workers were to still go to work despite the war, to grow the caviar, to export to Europe. And meanwhile, Palestinian kids were starving that the Times never mentioned. What world, I said to myself, are we possibly living in? Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper that not infrequently tells the truth, or some of the truth at least, calls the current situation a war of the generals against the children. And in Haaretz there was an incredible article by Gideon Levy, the Jewish organizations, the Holocaust Memorial industry. They recognize what they call righteous Gentiles. These were non-Jews that helped Jews during the horror of the Second World War. Well, one day, if they ever recognize righteous Jews, Gideon Levy will surely have pride of place. And in a recent article, I can't even know how to tell you this, he describes a visit by an Israeli TV presenter and influencer, a fashion influencer, who, protected by the Israeli army that she's completely in love with, visits this Palestinian village in the West Bank. And she reports, I had such admiration for these soldiers who had to put up with screaming grandmothers and screaming babies whose homes they had to enter at night, and they could still hold on to their humanity. Who makes up this stuff? I mean, you think you're living in la-la land, but it's serious. And this is what our press and our politicians and our culture shows to us all the time. Now here's what Omar al-Akkad writes about our civilization. And I'm quoting these people extensively because really I don't have the words, but thank God they do. And Omar writes, to preserve the values of the civilized world, it is necessary to set fire to a library, to blow up a mosque, to incinerate olive trees, to dress up in the lingerie of women who fled and then take pictures, to level universities, to loot jewelry, art, banks, food, to arrest children for picking vegetables, to shoot children for throwing stones, to parade the captured in their underwear, to break a man's teeth and shove a toilet brush in his mouth, to let combat dogs loose on a man with Down syndrome and then leave him to die. Otherwise, the uncivilized world might win. And that's the world we're living in. And the Passover recently, the Jewish holiday, the New York Times writes about what? The missing person at the Seder table, at the Passover table. And who's that? It's the Israeli hostage in captivity in Gaza. Not missing from anybody's table are the thousands of Palestinians, including multiple hundreds of children, who have been for decades kept in Israeli jails and tortured. Children tortured. They recently released a man who was 13 when he was arrested with no weapons, and he was charged with attempted murder. He got 10 years. Now he's 10 years later, they released him, mentally ill, a broken person. Those people are never mentioned. 2.5 years ago, I was in the West Bank working with Palestinian women who'd been tortured in Israeli jails. And let me tell you, you gotta hand it to the Israelis, they really know how to torture people. They've developed certain skills. That's one of them. And this has, of course, been documented by Israeli Physicians for Human Rights, all kinds of Israeli witnesses, international organizations, never talked about in the Western press. The fact that the head of the orthopedic surgery at Al-Shifa Hospital was a perfectly healthy, vigorous, 50-year-old man, was captured, and 6 weeks later, he died without his underclothes on, with blood streaming from his rectum, with his ribs broken, never reported in the North American press. It's just beneath our attention. Well, what does that tell us about Palestine as the moral issue of our time? The Dutch-American writer Jacob Riis, who wrote this book on the tenements of New York. In fact, it was a bestseller back in the 1890s. He said, the world forgets too easily, too easily, what it does not like to remember. And that forgetting is instantaneous. And you know, I don't know how this is going to end. All I know is that all the speaking that Chris has done, all the wonderful people that he's interviewed, all the interviews that I've been invited to speak on, the millions of people that have seen us and other people speak online, has not saved a single finger of a single Palestinian child. It does mean that we have to hold on to a sense of morality and possibility that goes beyond the present moment. I like to think, well, let me tell you one more thing. I recently wrote the foreword to a book by a Palestinian psychiatrist. Her name is Dr. Salma Jabbar. She was head of mental health for Palestine. But she was too honest and too sharp in her criticism of the traitorous Palestinian Authority. So she no longer has that position. But in her book, you know what she writes? She writes, how do I deal with the suicidal depression of an 82-year-old man who came to me for help when the house that he built with his own hands, now 20 years later, he's being forced to dismantle with his own hands? Do I give him Prozac for his depression? I have no idea what the answer that history will finally declare on current events. What I do know is that, well, there was this Jewish sage 100 years before Jesus. His name was Hillel, and he said that the task is not yours to finish, the task of healing the world, but neither are you free not to take part in it. And I think that's a choice we can all make in the present moment. We don't know how it's going to end, and none of us, I hope it's otherwise, but none of us in our lifetimes may see justice the way we would like to see it, but by God, we can make a contribution, however big, however little that is, and we can make sure that Palestine is never, ever, ever forgotten. Thank you.
Saying free Palestine. We hear that on the streets, we hear that on college campuses, and there are a lot of people who have been worried that that has been turned into a call to arms and a call to action and violence.
Yes.
By the way, someone, to make no mistake, if you screamed "Free Palestine," you helped pull the trigger. But if you, by the way, that's Miss Israel. That's Miss Universe Israel 2021 said that.
Wow. So they do have Jews that aren't smart.
So you have to say. So if you can't say "Free Pal," so it's so having
You literally did not do that.
So you can't have.
By the way, did.
You can't have a free Palestine? So Brianna Joy Gray says, okay, make no mistake, if you're a Zionist, you help murder 200,000 Palestinians.
I mean, it's not even a close score if you're going to be that much of a psychopath to keep score. I've never said free Palestine ever in my life because I'm afraid it encourages Israel to take more Palestine. So I don't believe you should say that.
So here's Dana Bash, and here's what she says. So again, advocating for so they have to equate Zionism with Jews, which they're not the same thing. Lots of Jews are against Zionism. In fact, the most hardcore religious Jews there are against Zionism. But they have to conflate that, and they also have to conflate free Palestine with anti-Semitism.
America first, Christ is king. You have to conflate those things. Whatever doesn't, the Judeo-Christian values, you know that nonsense term?
Yeah.
Abrahamic values is what they mean. They want to exclude Muslims from that.
Everything could be. So let's listen to Dana Bash.
You just heard the alleged killer saying free Palestine. We hear that on the streets, we hear that on college campuses, and there are a lot of people who have been worried that has been turned into a call to arms and a call to action and violence.
Yes.
We're going to need more censorship, aren't
We're going to need more censorship. You can't advocate for freedom. I love this. Everything to them could be misconstrued to be violence against Jews.
Woke right. That's what the woke right does. That's the woke right.
I'll take a bagel with no locks, please. No locks. Oy vey.
I wish I knew what a nudist show meant.
Me too.
That's pretty funny.
That sounds funny. So you can't say free Palestine. You can't say free Palestine now because this has got to be the craziest thing. So this is the most Zionist, unhinged Zionism that CNN has done so far. I think that's it. So,
they're all doing 9/11. They're another false flag, by the way. I don't believe any of them.
Right.
They're doing another 9/11, and so now it's time. The time is not to reason through this. The time is to be irrational. Like that black kid that stabbed the white kid, that they run that endlessly. It's time to take a racial stand and lose all rationality.
Yeah.
How long can you do this same trick on people? I'm dumb. I fell for 9/11. 20 years later, I can't fall for the same thing again. I apologize to Dana Bash.
Others claim that it's not. What do you think now that we have seen this?
I think there's no question, whatever its initial intent, or whatever people were saying initially or meant it has become a call for violence, and not violence against Israelis, which is wrong, but violence against Jews. And anybody who tries to separate
anybody who tries to separate
the two and try to say, I'm just against Palestine, I'm just, against Israel's policies in Palestine or in Gaza. And I'm not anti-Semitic. This was anti-Semitism pure and simple. That he happened to have killed 2 Israeli staff members didn't matter. It was a Jewish event. They were targets.
This, as you know better than most, hardly happened in a vacuum. Things are happening so often that sometimes we become numb to it.
You mean like the slaughter of children in Gaza? You mean like that? Isn't it amazing? That's amazing.
Sometimes I've been numb to it my whole life. We've been in a war killing millions of people as long as I've been alive.
How about
to it sometimes?
And so, by the way, so a lot of Jews say free Palestine. So are they calling for violence against themselves? I don't think so.
Send him to El Salvador, Jimmy, I say. You know what I say.
Yeah.
It normalized. Exactly. So let's not participate in that, and let's just give some of the examples in just the past few months. We saw a man arrested for allegedly planning a mass shooting at a New York Jewish center. Tel Aviv restaurant stabbing. The perpetrator arrived from the U.S. Then this is just, again, the past several months. A man arrested for making terrorist threats to a Manhattan synagogue, the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. There was a stabbing there. And then, of course, an arson attack at Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's.
Wait, what do you
have every day?
What?
That's not even close to the crime regular Americans have every day. Not Israeli dignitaries. Everybody that lives here, the crime. I moved out of LA because of crime rate like that. How would you even rank that?
It's unbelievable, and it's unbelievable that she's doing this against the backdrop of tens of thousands. I mean, they killed 900 people since this morning today
it's
in Gaza.
A quarter million. Isn't it a quarter million at least?
It's up there. Some estimates are that they've killed a 250,000 Palestinians, but definitely for sure 50,000, and definitely they killed 900 since this morning till today, till I'm doing this show. They have to go to the look. It's like the equivalent of a hangnail. They're screaming about in the middle of a war zone. This is
Jimmy. Can you imagine?
So if they lose, just like you said, Kurt, if they lose anti-Semitism, this thing that is mostly made up and fake, if they can't throw that around all over the place, then it's just over. Israel's over.
It's their fuel source.
Yes.
Zionism needs anti-Semitism, just like BLM needed when they couldn't find racism. They had to find like a rope someone tied in a garage and say it's a noose.
Yeah, remember that?
It's the fuel for their nonsense. This falls. By the way, this is lame. I lived through 9/11. I was there. I already been through the trauma of like, oh my God, terror. This ain't cutting it, toots. Sorry.
Let's see what else they say. This is so stupid.
Your whole life has been dedicated to education, but education seems to not even be close to enough.
Education, you can be a PhD and an SOB at the same time. You can be well educated. Look, the first people to support Hitler in Nazi Germany were amongst the first were the university professors. They got on board right away. So education, of course, I believe in education. I wouldn't be doing education and working in that and trying to educate people if I didn't believe it. But it's not a magic bullet. We also have to inculcate, whether you're educated, whether you have years of postgraduate education or none at all, this is wrong. There is no but when it comes to killing people because of their ethnic, religious heritage.
It's like they're saying it into a mirror. It's like they're describing themselves. Did I just show you the guy who said we have to slaughter all the Palestinians because it's their culture? We have to get rid of them? We got to
knock
nuke them.
yourselves out. Here's what I'm going to say. Not Free Palestine. Don't use my fucking money to do your crimes. How about that? You pay. Get your billionaires that live here that don't live in Israel because it's not safe. Get them to pay.
I mean, this is at one level. It's truly remarkable. It's the lack of self-awareness to the extreme that I've never seen. It's like they're describing everything Israel's doing and pretending that's what the people opposed to Zionism are doing. It's just amazing. They're literally
the CNN demographic.
According to every human rights organization, the International Criminal Court, the UN, they're committing a genocide and they're an apartheid state.
Did you see what I texted you?
What?
Just now?
No.
Because one of the first people to collaborate with Hitler were the university. No, they weren't. They were the first people he killed. But the first people to collaborate with Hitler were the Zionists. There's a coin minted with a Star of David on one side and a Swazi on the other side. So the first early adopters to suck up to Hitler were Zionists. That's a fact.
Let's see what else. This is really, I'm playing this because this is just, I haven't ever seen anything like this.
Well, it's only for like 3 viewers, Jimmy. Let's face it.
Yeah.
There is no but when it comes to raping women in Gaza.
Yeah, there is no but. It didn't happen.
She even did
happen.
She even did her Freudian slip. There is no but when it comes to raping women in Gaza. Oh, you mean like we have the video of the Israelis raping the people in the prison? We have it.
And protesting in favor of letting them
and then
man on man, by the way. It's not like
so then when they arrested those people the Israelis who did the raping that we have on video, then the Israelis then went and protested to let the rapers out.
Well, Chabad Lubavitch and those scumbags from Likud and all those psychos that prop Bibi up the way Trump's propped up by the Adelson widow. Bibi has even worse people propping him up, and he's going to jail unless he does everything they want. That's right.
That's exactly why he's doing all this.
In the area next to Gaza on October 7th, there is no but about kidnapping children because they happen to be Jews.
What about when you kidnap children because they happen to be Palestinian and you keep them and you starve them and you keep them in prison? There are thousands of Palestinian children have been kidnapped and put in prison in Israel. It's just amazing.
You know, you shouldn't have ran your yaps about Putin so much.
Yeah.
Because it formed quite a contrast with Putin's a pussycat compared to these people, ain't he?
Yeah, he is. This is like double standards on steroids and meth and heroin. I mean, it is like astronomical. The crazy double standards they have.
I only know she's lying scum. I want to reiterate because Jews told me. I'm a good person who's prejudiced against Muslims, as you should be. I would never listen to an Arab about what the Israelis did. Jews ratted you out, bitch. So that's why I know you're a liar. I listen to Jews.
There is no but. This is unacceptable. Irrespective of how you feel about Israeli policies, irrespective of how you feel about the Israeli government, this is wrong, and there should be a universal outcry.
Okay.
There is on CNN right now. And me, I'm sure that chick was working outreach to Gaza, and that's why the scum pig IDF or whatever group, unit, whatever, picked her as the the same way they use the Holocaust shamelessly. It's called Holocaust. That means sacrifice by fire. People like her sacrifice their own people by fire to get their little power trip. That's a human sacrifice that these scumbag Zionists did to Jews.
Come see us live in Los Angeles, Buffalo, Toledo, Montreal, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, London, Liverpool, Birmingham. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.
Israel is waging a deliberate war of extermination. That's according to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, who himself, it should be said, perpetrated war crimes against the Palestinian people. It's in a devastating piece written for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, and in practice constitutes a confession to genocide. Let's go through what he's written and why this is so important. Now, Olmert says this: the Israeli government is waging a pointless war without a clear goal or plan and without any chance of success. Since its establishment, the State of Israel has never initiated such a war. In this too, the gang of criminals headed by Benjamin Netanyahu has set a precedent that is unparalleled in the history of the state. Now, I should just quickly note, other than the revisionism there, the airbrushing of Israeli war crimes throughout its entire history, I should quickly note that Olmert was a member of Netanyahu's Likud party for over 3 decades. From 1973, the year it was founded, until 2006. He then went off to join Kadima, which was presented as a so-called moderate party, despite being led by Ariel Sharon, a right-wing war criminal. He goes on to say this: what is happening in the Gaza Strip in recent weeks has nothing to do with the goal of a legitimate war. Our fighters are being sent by the state leadership and the army leadership that obeys it to rampage in the neighbourhoods of Gaza City, Jabalia and Khan Yunis in an illegitimate military campaign. This is now a political private war, and its immediate result is turning the Gaza Strip into a humanitarian disaster zone. He goes on to say that he has, until this point, rebutted accusations made against the IDF and the Israeli state in terms of conduct in Gaza, including accusations of genocide and war crimes. Indeed, he says he put himself forward for interviews for Western media outlets, saying, more than once in interviews, I disappointed those who invited me when I firmly claimed that Israel was not committing war crimes in Gaza. Excessive killings? Yes, an unimaginable number of uninvolved victims, including children, women and the elderly, did occur, but I argued firmly and with self-convincing conviction, in no case was an order given by a decision-maker at the political level to harm civilians in Gaza without distinction. The large number of uninvolved civilians killed in Gaza was unreasonable, unjustifiable, unacceptable. But all of them, I said on every media channel in the world, were the result of a brutal war. Olmert there is saying that he used his position and authority to push back at those of us who have been saying very clearly and obviously since the genocide began that Israel was committing and is committing heinous war crimes on a daily basis. That's because of the overwhelming evidence and indeed the publicly repeated statements of genocidal and criminal intent by Israeli leaders. Olmert engaged in atrocity denial in the face of all the facts and should be made to account for that. That doesn't mean what should be regarded as a confession of Israeli crimes and genocide isn't important given who he is. Now, he says this war should have ended as early 2024, and it continues without justification, without a defined goal and without a political vision for the future of the Gaza Strip and the entire Middle East. He also says that he had argued that the Israeli army did not operate an order or directive or intention from a senior command echelon to harm civilians indiscriminately. Therefore, he says, as he understood at the time, no war crimes were committed. He goes on to say that he had denied the crimes committed by Israel, but in recent weeks, I have been unable to do so. What we are doing in Gaza is a war of extermination, indiscriminate, unrestrained, cruel, and criminal killing of civilians. We are doing this not because of an accidental loss of control in a certain sector, not because of a disproportionate outburst of fighters in some unit, but as a result of a policy dictated by the government knowingly, intentionally, viciously, maliciously, with recklessness. Yes, we are committing war crimes. So there it is, a war of extermination. That's what he says. Israel is perpetrating an indiscriminate, unrestrained, cruel and criminal killing of civilians. And he makes clear this is not happening because of some sort of breakdown in discipline, but because of an intentional, deliberate policy directed by Israel's rulers. This is a crucial admission because this former Israeli prime minister, who has knowledge, of course, of running the Israeli state machinery, of directing the army, has inside an understanding of Israeli politics. He's no fringe figure in Israeli society, but a politician who emerged from the Israeli right. He's telling the world that Israel is deliberately waging a war of extermination against civilians at the direction of the Israeli government. He goes on, first, the starvation of Gaza. On this issue, the position of senior government officials is open and clear. Yes, we are depriving the residents of Gaza of food, medicine, and minimal means of subsistence as part of a declared policy. Netanyahu is trying, as usual, to obscure the nature of the instructions he gives in order to evade his legal and criminal responsibility when the time comes. But some of his eunuchs say it openly and publicly and even proudly, yes, we will starve Gaza because all the residents of Gaza are Hamas and therefore there is no moral or operational limit to destroying them all, more than 2 million people. Israeli media channels, each for their own reasons, some of which are understandable, are trying to moderate the picture of what is happening in Gaza. But the picture seen in the world is much broader and above all shocking. It is impossible to be even-handed and indifferent to it. It is no longer possible to ignore and shake our heads as if the world's reaction to what is happening there is simply a widespread outbreak of anti-Semitism, because after all, everyone hates us and everyone is anti-Semite, everyone's anti-Semitic. So here the former Israeli prime minister makes clear that the Israeli state is deliberately starving Gaza, which is a grave war crime and indeed forms the central basis of the arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity against Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant. I'm not those suggesting that indeed Netanyahu may well face trial. He may well face justice for what he has done, that he's trying to, in some way, cover his own backside because of future legal proceedings, though, I mean, the evidence is so overwhelming, what is the point, frankly? And as he notes, as the repeated statements by Israeli leaders and officials have made clear, they see no distinction at all between the civilian population of Gaza and Hamas, those they deem military targets. And when he says there is no moral or operational limit to destroying them all, more than 2 million people, he could not be clearer. That's genocide. The Genocide Convention states that genocide constitutes acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial or religious group. He refers to the evidence for the shocking plight of Gaza that the world has access to, and also refers to the malicious and false use of anti-Semitism to shut down any scrutiny of Israel and its crimes. He goes on to note European leaders, he calls friends of Israel breaking ranks to condemn its murderous behavior. He goes on to say we continue to massacre Palestinian civilians in the West Bank as well. He says that the declaration by the head of the Samaria Regional Council, Yossi Dagan, that Palestinian villages should be annihilated is a declaration of genocide. He further makes the point that the pogroms taking place in the West Bank are not isolated incidents. He says when a Palestinian village is burned, and quite a few have already been burned, they will explain to us that the perpetrators are a small violent group that does not represent the residents of the territories. This is a lie. They are many. He says it's impossible to ignore the behaviour of certain units in the IDF, including what he describes as the elite units, where the best and most courageous fighters serve. He says there are too many cases of brutal shooting of civilians, of destruction of property and homes, even when this should not happen. He discusses the looting of property, thefts from homes, which in many cases IDF soldiers have also taken pride in and published in personal posts. We are committing war crimes. And he's alluding there to IDF soldiers boasting of their war crimes. I mean, never has a crime been so confessed to and boasted about as it was actually happening. That's what we see all the time. IDF soldiers have posted online because they're high on their own hubris. They're high on their sense of nothing will ever happen to them. So they can flout their criminality, their genocidal mania. He notes too, of course, the pogroms in the West Bank, which must not be neglected, the murderous rampage taking place in the West Bank itself, which, as he notes, is not isolated incidents, but systemic. Now, on one level, it's frankly ridiculous that we have to engage in a debate about whether the Israeli army is waging a war of extermination against the Palestinian people and committing the most depraved imaginable war crimes. It's like arguing about whether the earth is flat or not, except it's about death on a unimaginable mass scale. But what's absolutely important right now is that we build an absolutely undeniable consensus that these war crimes and indeed genocide is taking place, both to stop the West facilitating this abomination, for example, through arms sales and diplomatic support, and to get accountability and justice for those who have facilitated this genocide, not just in Israel, but of course across the West. I would note that for saying the sorts of things this Israeli former Prime Minister has said, people have been threatened, deplatformed, silenced, sacked, arrested, and even faced with deportation. I would also note the minimal coverage in the Western media about this. It's ridiculous. I mean, the former Israeli Prime Minister has just gone out and said that Israel is committing genocide, a war of extermination, terrible war crimes. An Israeli Prime Minister who was in Benjamin Netanyahu's own party for over 3 decades. Why isn't that newsworthy? Why isn't that plastered everywhere? I think, to be honest, because it would just show expose the catastrophic failure of coverage. It's not failures, I know it's a mistake. There's a systemic problem in the Western media in terms of how they've covered this, because it's so blindingly obvious what Israel is doing. And this would just emphasise to Western audiences how they've been deliberately misled by the Western media about what's taking place. And it also exposes, of course, Western leaders, because they have facilitated all of this. They armed and backed it all the way through, despite all the overwhelming evidence, which even the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert can see for himself. This itself exposes them criminally for what they've done. Now, we should note that where Olmert was Israeli Prime Minister, he committed war crimes in Gaza, specifically in the 2008-2009 onslaught. In fact, he even declared at the time, we've said that if there's rocket fire against the south of the country, there will be a severe and disproportionate Israeli response to the fire on the citizens of Israel and its security forces. Outright coming out and committing to a disproportionate response is itself a confession of war crimes. The point is that even this former Israeli Prime Minister has come out and said what is undeniable. And the cracks continue to emerge. The German state, which has a history of committing genocide, of course the Holocaust, the industrialised extermination of the Jewish people, as well as Roma, others classed as undesirable. And of course, in Africa, with the Herero and Nama genocides, it's continued that theme, of course, by backing and facilitating Israel's genocide. Well, now its right-wing Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, a militantly pro-Israel politician, says he could frankly no longer understand the goal of what the Israeli army is doing in the Gaza Strip. To harm the civilian population in such a way, as has increasingly been the case in recent days, can no longer be justified by fight against Hamas terrorism. Once again, Captain Obvious there, and the way he makes it out as though this is a recent phenomenon. I mean, Israel is doing what it's done from the beginning. This isn't, I mean, they're trying to make it out like, well, this was one thing before, it was a military campaign, it's sort of gone off the boil, it's gone extreme, it's gone spun out of control recently. This has been a criminal genocidal onslaught from the beginning. And they're trying to pretend that isn't the case because it exposes them. But this does again underline how it is all falling apart. Now, Israel continues to commit the most obscene crimes imaginable in front of the whole world. This weekend, dozens of Palestinians were slaughtered when the Israeli military struck Fahmy al-Jaghari school in Gaza. Children were burned alive on camera. Palestinian children burned alive by the West. Let's be clear, that's what's happening here. The West is responsible for this. It is a Western crime. The whole world can see it. And if you think the West will escape the inevitable consequences, then naivety doesn't even cover it. Sowing, then the reaping. The mass butchery of innocent people, including children, has been a central feature of Israel's genocide. On Friday night, one of those children killed was 11-year-old Yakin Hamad, known as Gaza's youngest influencer. She offered practical tips on survival with smiling, happy videos in unbearable circumstances.
Ice cream. Today we are distributing to the students of Aisha and the children of Gaza.
Ice skating, ice skating, ice skating, ice skating.
The invention of war. Didn't they cut off our gas? Here we made gas and are putting wood here.
And we boil everything on it. Gaza, no to the impossible.
How was a crime so monumental, so obscene, so shameless ever possible? Future generations will debate this at length. Entire books, conferences will be dedicated to this. Entire fields of study. So let those future generations know the evidence at the time, all the way through, was overwhelming. There was no excuse for not knowing from the very start what was happening. Don't indulge any future lies, or current lies, about people with power and influence not knowing what was really going on. They knew everything. This genocide happened because Western states consciously made it happen. They directed it in practice. And it all happened with the direct facilitation of the Western media. The reckoning must be severe. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments, help us take on the pro-genocide media in practice, which is what it is. Let's just be honest, at patreon.com/Owen Jones 84. You make everything we do possible. We're reaching huge numbers, millions of people every month because of your support. Do share the video, listen to us on the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll speak to you in a bit.
Hello everyone and welcome to Breezy Politics. Who is the American president who had the spine to tell Israel's prime minister point blank that Israel is committing a Holocaust? We're gonna get to that story in a moment, but first, I have a moral dilemma, and I need your take. I've been involved in a small effort working on an analysis paper that examines how societies react when their own state commits an atrocity as monstrous as the Holocaust. Do they enable it? Do they try to stop it? Or do they simply look away? To explore this topic, I chose to compare between two cases: how German society reacted during the Nazi Holocaust and how the Israeli society reacted to the Gaza Holocaust. By the end of the paper, I ended up with a dilemma that never crossed my mind before. Therefore, I am very intrigued to see what you think about it. But first, let me lay out the context for you. When I first began reading about the Nazi era and how German society reacted to the Nazi Holocaust, I noticed something very interesting. Even after years of relentless Nazi propaganda orchestrated by the infamous Joseph Goebbels, aimed at dehumanizing entire groups of people, Slavs, Jews, Romani, and others, by pretty much blaming them for all of Germany's struggles. But still, when whispers began spreading that a Holocaust might be taking place, some resistance still emerged from different parts of the society. The White Rose movement, the German Catholic Peace movement, the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler, just to name a few. But what stood out to me the most was how the Nazi leadership perceived the society's stance on this issue. If you visit the US Holocaust Memorial Museum website, you will see how far the Nazis went to deceive their own German society. Take this for example. You will find, and I quote, "Positive stories were fabricated as part of the planned deception." The Nazis were printing booklets telling the Germans that, and I quote, "In occupied Poland, German authorities had put Jews to work, built clean hospitals, set up soup kitchens for Jews, and provided them with newspapers and vocational training." I won't bore you with more details, you can look it up yourself, but the point is, it all comes down to this. The Nazi leadership knew that even after years of relentless anti-Slavic, anti-Jewish, and anti-Romani propaganda, their own society would not accept and would not tolerate genocide as an official policy. And that says a lot. Now, compare the attitude of German society towards the Nazi Holocaust with how Israeli society reacted to Israel's Holocaust in Gaza. On January 26, 2024, the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel is plausibly committing genocide in Gaza.
Genocide.
And this is how Israeli society responded.
Tourists and school children are going on field trips in Israel, but not to museums, instead to watch the destruction of Gaza, known as Genocide Tourism internationally.
We were a mile and a half or so from 300,000 people who were being forcibly starved to death by the Israelis.
That was Matthew Ho, a former U.S. State Department official and U.S. Marine veteran, who recently took this tour in Sderot, where visitors use coin-operated binoculars to peek into Gaza.
An Israeli school field trip showed up, and these children, they're teenagers, they came from 2 hours away to come and watch the genocide.
The tours are also done in English for international visitors and are included in Birthright Israel trips for Jewish Americans and for all Israeli school children.
The population sees it as entertainment, where you have this complete dismissal of the Palestinians as human beings, but as part of their school curriculum.
The historical irony of what we just witnessed is absolutely staggering. Think about it. While many survivors of the Nazi genocide were marching and protesting all around the world against Israel's genocide in Gaza, the descendants of other survivors in Israel were so proud they're committing a genocide of their own, they made it part of the curriculum. They load their children into buses, take them to a hill besides the Gaza concentration camp, hand them the most high-tech binoculars to ensure they get a clear, crisp, high-definition view of other children inside the camp being starved, shot, burned alive, and orphaned. And I've noticed that for some people in the West, it's always hard to recognize an atrocity when Israel is the one committing it. So for those people, let me put it in terms you'd understand. Just think about it like you're watching a footage showing that when Germans under the Nazi rule started hearing whispers that the genocide is taking place, they didn't try to stop it, they didn't deny it, they didn't question it, they didn't even look away. But instead, they were like, wait, what? We're committing a genocide? Huh. We should take our kids to watch it and enjoy it. Now, how does that sound? Because if it sounds horrible, if it sounds sick, if it sounds disgusting, that's because it is, at least for a normal society, but not according to the Israeli society. And that says a lot. And the fact that you will never dream of seeing these stories on CNN or Fox News or New York Times or the Washington Post also speaks volumes. Because let's be real, if this was happening in another country, we'd have Oscar-winning movies and endless panel discussions about how a society could sink this low. And it doesn't end there. After Israeli kids come home from school, have their supper, and settling for the evening, their families take them on organized night boat trips around Gaza while it's being bombarded. This time, however, is not about watching children being killed. That's reserved for school trips. This time, it's about staking their claim.
While Gaza is relentlessly being erased, they took a boat with the first families, ready to occupy the land of those who are being killed and starved to death.
המטרה של גרעיני ההתיישבות להתקרב ככל האפשר לעזה, לראות את עזה כולה ולהבין שמעתה והלאה עזה תהיה כולה יהודית.
While entire families in Gaza are being wiped out, exterminated, Israeli families cruise along the coastline, circling the Gaza concentration camp, gazing at the destruction with excitement, not as mourners, not as bystanders, but as future landowners. They're explicitly mapping out the lands and homes of the Palestinian people while being wiped out in real time, staking their claim before the bodies are even cold. Just a few days ago, I came across a clip of one of America's most prominent Jews, Professor Finkelstein, a descendant of Holocaust survivors, making this very point. He brought it up in a discussion with Glenn Greenwald, one of my favorite journalists who is also Jewish. Take a look.
If you read the explosion of sheer racial derangement in Israeli society, the glee, the joy, the euphoria they have carried on with in the extermination of the people of Gaza, just the postings on their social media, it's a genuine sight to behold. And I am not sure whether it hasn't reached or plumbed a depth well beyond Nazi Germany, even in the years of war. You have to remember, as I'm sure you know, formally, at any rate, the Nazi genocide was kept out of public view. But this is a totally different thing in Israel. This is every night on the evening talk shows. the social media is saturated with soldiers boasting in glee about the crimes they're committing in Gaza. So this country is so completely unhinged.
You should watch this full interview. It's just two beautiful, peace-loving, principled, non-Zionist Jews discussing the depth to which Zionism is sinking. However, what I want to say to Professor Finkelstein is, if you think Israelis finding so much joy and glee in the death and destruction of other innocent people is as low as a society can go, hold on. It gets worse. Because after Israel's medieval blockade on Gaza has led to starving many Palestinian children to death, the world community pressured Israel to stop blocking the humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Consequently, the Israeli government, led by war criminals, caved in to the pressure and partially lifted the blockade, allowing some trucks through. However, the moment the Israeli society heard that food trucks were on their way to reach the starving Palestinian children, they rushed with their kids. I will never understand why they teach their kids to do these things, but that's a topic for another day. So they rushed to physically block the life-saving aid trucks from reaching the starving Palestinian children.
They're images that have enraged and horrified Jewish settlers throwing aid destined for Gaza to the ground. This was not a one-off. For months, videos have emerged showing aid convoys for Gaza being blocked or vandalized by settlers and Israeli activists in attacks condemned by the White House.
It is a total outrage that there are people who are attacking and looting these convoys coming from Jordan, going to Gaza to deliver humanitarian assistance.
They put their bodies between the life-saving foods and the starving Palestinian children, deliberately ensuring that more Palestinian children would starve to death that night.
They're starving to death.
You know what? If they're starving to death, no a single loaf of bread should go there.
And if you were wondering why would anybody do such a horrible thing, it's because what they want, the reason they've been killing Palestinians since 1948 is... I'm going to let them speak for themselves.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel. But what of the Palestinians who live in Gaza now?
I just think we need to kill them, every one of them, and that's it. And if not that, because the country will not let that happen, the government. Just, the least we can do is just kick them.
You heard that right. They don't hide their intentions anymore. Professor Finkelstein is absolutely correct. Israel is a lunatic state representing an unhinged society. A society just like this girl are disappointed that the Israeli government hasn't managed to exterminate all the 7 million Palestinians.
We need to kill them, every one of them, and that's it.
Living on their land in Palestine. Now, is it just me, or is this the same Nazi ideology we've been taught to hate and despise? So why is Nazism tolerated when it's practiced by Israel? Why is it excused and not called out when it's called for by Israelis? What am I missing here? And for those who's going to say, nah man, this is just the fringe opinion and it does not represent the Israeli society as a whole, I really wish you were right. I really do. But you're absolutely wrong. And here's why. When the whole world was marching and protesting the Holocaust in Gaza, Tel Aviv University conducted a poll asking the Israeli society if they thought the Israeli government was doing too much killing in Gaza. They euphemistically described it as too much firepower. So if Israel was using too much firepower in Gaza. And here's what they found. Almost 60% of Israelis believed that the military was using too little firepower. Not enough killing. 36.6% believed the level of killing was appropriate. And only 1% thought it was too much killing. Imagine, 99% of the Israeli society thinks that the collective punishment, the genocide, the killing and maiming of hundreds of thousands of innocent people, most of whom are women and children, was either not enough or appropriate. And that leads me to my moral dilemma. which is not about comparing how Germany and Israeli societies reacted to the genocides of their states, because at this point, there is no comparison to be drawn. That question has already been answered. What I've been wrestling with, however, is something more disturbing and more unsettling. And that is, on a purely moral level, who is more evil? Who embodies the darkest and the purest form of evil? Is it the Israeli political and military machine, the one on trial for genocide? Or is it the Israeli society that didn't just cheer from the sidelines, didn't just found joy and excitement and entertainment in watching the worst crime possible against humanity? Genocide. But went out of its way to find practical means to physically participate in the extermination of the innocent occupied Palestinian people. I'm really interested in your take on this. I'll be reading through the comment section to see what you think about this dilemma. And before I wrap up, let's answer the opening question. The American president who told Israel's prime minister that Israel is committing a Holocaust was President Ronald Reagan, 41 years before October 7th, 2023. On the morning of August 12th, 1982, President Reagan received intelligence that the Israeli army in Lebanon was once again doing what it does best, killing women and children. Without hesitation, the president picked up the phone and called the Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, demanding an immediate halt to the massacre. And then in no uncertain terms, he said, Menachem, this is a Holocaust. Later on, President Reagan wrote in his diaries that he used the word Holocaust deliberately, accurately describing what was happening. He reflected that the defining image of that Israeli massacre in Lebanon would be a 7-month-old baby with its arm blown off. This story is for those who think history began on October 7th. Thank you for watching.